Jack Bauer, he came to me about 2.5 years ago. He was 15, just turning 16, 88, 92. All right. So, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of room to work with here. So I've already identified him as genetically, he's very good with the skill set side of things. Right. So it was more
What?
about attacking
Yeah.
the.
What did you see genetically with him? Because having met him in person, he's tall, he's lanky. He's not like I expected to see this monster come through the door. When you see 103, you're like, oh, this dude's going to look like a defensive end or something like that, like a Paul Skeens. And to me, I was like, two things jumped out. One is you do not look like that guy. And number two, that means that I see a whole lot of other development that could take place that you could even throw harder than when you're where you're at, which kind of blew my mind. So is that what you were thinking when you saw him?
I would, I mean, like for 2.5 years ago, it was obviously he's put on more size too, right?
Yeah.
So like
His
even
his legs are his lower half is pretty
definitely
substantial.
filled out. Yeah, it
Yeah.
started to fill out. And like that's the other thing too, is like, I worked, I helped out a lot with like, collaborating with Matt White and his strength and conditioning guy, David. Like, we would collect, force plate data, everything like that and collect all that so, they can help out implement, the weight room side and overseeing it, and helping that. And so I mean, like for me, it's like, I mean, he's a very athletic kid. I mean, he really is. And that is the pre-notion out there of like when people think genetically skilled, they're thinking, oh, well, he's genetically built physically. So like, here's how I kind of put this. All physical potential is genetic, but not all genetic potential is physical. So there is an ingrained neurological skill set that is predisposed from birth. Did you ever see that video of that 7-year-old Japanese kid that was thrown against the wall?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did he train for years? No. Like
No.
that is so like to my point of that is that when you're in this industry with performance, you have to identify, is this kid a high genetic skill set, like where he has the skill, or is he like on the physical side, but he needs more of the skill? So like staying in the middle of that and then kind of learn how to tailor the training is pretty important.
What did you see that stood out to you from him?
Um, it was really the timing of his sequencing, like, and that is to the point of like the genetic skill of how the brain sends these mechanical receptors, these electrical signals that tell the muscles to contract, to turn on, to create really, really good, efficient, dynamic movement. And so, like for me, it was like seeing the timing of his body. And like when he first came on board, like, he struggled a little bit with his command issues, missing east to west, and he completely cleaned that up. Like his command skyrocketed just this past year. And like, one of the things that definitely helped obviously was getting stronger and more stable, right? Because again, when they express a high genetic skill output of movement, sometimes they have a hard time controlling that. So we implemented tons of isometrics on him, like before his outings, like this past spring. Like he would come in on the table and we would do like a full body primer isometric contraction series.
Explain that to people out there what that would look like, what that means
Like
for folks that are for folks that are just trying to like get a handle on it. You hear isometrics. What exactly did he do?
So when we put him on the table, like we started with the lower half of the kinetic chain, right? We're doing, leg abduction, iso hold. So like when you're priming, you're holding a sustained contraction for 6 to 10 seconds on, 6 to 10 seconds off. And when you first start off with guys as isos, you only do it at 10% of the rate of the force. So like subjectively, how the athlete interprets 10%, they're holding that contracted state. So what it's doing is that it's connecting what is known as afferent, efferent mechanical receptors, where the brain is sending these electrical signals to start telling these muscles to turn on, to contract, to create high force production, to then better stabilize the body. Because before the body moves dynamically, it's got to stabilize itself isometrically. And isometrics is a lost art in this sport. You're reading up on like older professional players that played in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They did isometrics a lot. And I think we're getting away from that. And I think it's a lot because of all these fancy gadget and tools, but they're not bad. I mean, a good coach has multiple tools in their back pocket, and they just know how to disperse it to each guy. So again, like a guy like Bauer, it was again, like attacking that low hanging fruit, get in the weight room, learning how to map out your year, off season, in season training. And then for us, like, him having the access to the whole Bo Jackson's Elite Sports Dome, the whole BSF facility that we have in our backspace, and being able to be a support system for him was huge. Like, there'd be times he'd be throwing at 10, 11 a.m. on Saturday, and we're in here at 8 a.m. doing primers on the physical therapy table. And again too, and I also want to make sure I give credit to all their coaches that were in his corner as well, that have been helping him and training him and stuff. But yeah, it's just like that. That's just how I look at this all. It's like when I define pitching mechanics, okay, pitching mechanics is an expression based on how much stress an athlete has adapted over the years of throwing, because throwing is a very aggressive movement, and because it's passive, when you're going into scap retraction, right, that's a distraction force on the anterior part of the shoulder bicep tendon, right? So that's why when people say, oh, early trunk rotation and you're dragging, right, that creates a distraction force where that deep labrum, right, is. And then when you're hitting layback, you're going further, obviously this is my active, but you're going further back. So that's passive. So neurologically, your muscles aren't doing the job that it's supposed to contract to stabilize it. So the stress goes through passive connective tissue, the deep material continuum, right? Tendon, the tissue, tendon, ligament, and the bone cartilage. And that's why you see growth plate injuries happening to younger kids. So if we know that that's the type of stress that we exhibit, this is where kind of the isometrics come into play, because when we undergo stress, muscles will tend to shut off due to stress. They won't create as much high force production and stability in that joint, because muscles stabilize joints. So if we know that based on the mechanics and the way that we throw a baseball, there's certain muscles that are going to be involved. They're going to be more shut off due to that stress. And so what ends up happening is that when you're looking at all the length tension relationship between the muscles around the joint, certain muscles are going to want to tighten up to further stabilize this joint because of some of the other muscles not doing its job. So that's known as reciprocal inhibition. So, but the problem that I see in the industry is that what's the first diagnosis that we do with something that's tight? Oh, we got to dig, we got to smash, we got to stretch. And what that's going to do is start causing muscle inhibition. That's going to decrease force output. So the tightness is a neurological adaptation that the brain is saying, hey, we need to tighten this muscle up to hold, to basically have higher force production rate to better stabilize this joint. And so the isometrics, if we know what we need to target, it kind of helps rebalance the length tension relationship of the muscles around that joint. And that's a lot that I'm learning as a muscle system specialist practitioner. I definitely want to give my credit to Greg Mack on just the things that I'm learning, but that right there is a huge component, with, again, sustaining health, especially at a young age that's throwing that hard. And obviously there's other components too, making sure you're staying up on the mobility, the weight room, the nutrition, the sleep, things like that.
When you're saying isometrics, is he basically just going through and tightening a muscle, starting with the lower half, working his way up? Or is there a specific plan that you would have to do that?
Yeah. We definitely, there's definitely a specific plan. I'm manually holding these positions. So I'm applying an external resistance force, and he's got to hold and contract
Gotcha.
that. So when I first started with him, we were doing about 10 to 20% of the rate of the force. And then we would progress that, with that. We would start with abductors, adductors. We would go into hip flexor, iso holds. We would go into the T-spine trunk, which that's a huge thing. If real quick I could talk about is, sure. Okay. So when you hear that pitchers will drop their release height in season, okay, or they always complain about my front side's pulling off, right, or I'm opening up too early. What happens when we throw more, all right, and especially when we increase volume, is that when we hit front foot strike and we're going through the deceleration pronation phase, right, our deep spine muscles like our multifidus, erector spinae, they all have to eccentrically load to stop rotation. So that's morphologically, that's stress on our structure. So what happens is that we naturally start to lose thoracic rotation to the throwing side. And so what then ends up happening is that we have less separation, or at least the timing of hip to shoulder separation, your kinematic sequencing, start to decrease. So then what tends to happen when you hit front foot strike, you may be landing here instead of back here. So then the byproduct of that is front side, release height, boom. So the thoracic spine is the center of all rotation. So the integrity of that plays a huge role. So that's why I say what you do pre and post throw dictates the way you move during the throwing. Don't want to make a kid like Bauer robotic. Keep him athletic, how he naturally was gifted. So that's what we hit a lot on the isos, was he would, then you go here on the table, and then I'll be applying a perturbation, and then he would have to hold and contract that. And then we do shoulder IR, ER, things like that too. And the bicep, tricep.
Well, help me through his mechanics. Take it step by step, because you heard his description of it, which I thought was amazingly simplified, but understanding how he moved very well, which was impressive to me. Like, again, you hear some guys like, I'm just trying to throw. He actually knew each step of his motion, was able to describe it, but made throwing 103 sound so simple, which it probably is for him right now, because if you're thinking about it, you're not doing it. If you think about all that stuff, you can't possibly be free and easy, loose. Your muscles aren't doing what they're supposed to do. But why don't you help me through what you see when you see him throw?
Yeah, no, I mean, it just goes to show the awareness that he has, kind of just like how his body is now expressing movement. And so that's the subjectivity to how an athlete interprets their own motor output, like the way they move. So, again, like Bauer, like he likes to take his time with his back step. He finds his peak leg lift, right? And right as that peak leg lift, you're going to notice that his front side and front leg work together. But he does a really good job at holding those positions with that back leg when he gets into hip flexion, coil, or hinge, however anybody out there wants to interpret that concept. But he does such a great job. And also too, like, look at his structure, like he has longer lever length. So his ability to ride the slope, hold that back drive leg, but he does a really good job is like that shin angle. It's known as your force vector. He does a really good job at angling it down that mound, where he doesn't get into too much of a vertical shin position. He's kind of like at this nice trajectory, of moving down this way. And then again, like the front side, everything's coming together. The timing of his separation now, he stays really long, but what you notice is that his wrist through the whole entire delivery stays really well behind that ball. And now he's pulling through this, which is known as centrifugal forces. So he's doing a really good job at pulling through here and then boom, snapping down. And so that was something like when we were first working with him, like we applied a lot of like the 2-pound med ball work. And again, like he was missing more east to west, a couple of years ago and stuff like that. And so what we got more thinking is like neurologically how to work more like north to south, taking this shoulder to that front leg hip and then boom, snapping down. That naturally helped him get better extension on the ball and just able to throw like mentally through the catcher, not at the mitt. So that's another way to interpret that.
There are two things that jumped out at me. One was when he explained it, he said, I'm going to keep my knee pointed basically at the second baseman as long as I can, even though you really can't do it. And that's to help keep his shin angle correct, but not collapse, basically.
Yeah, like the way he interprets that is like sometimes like guys, if they can't stabilize their center mass moving down the mound, because again, the mound has gravity, so it has a slope pulling them down. So you got to be stronger than those forces of gravity and stable, right? So for him, it's like, okay, the stronger he got, the more stable he got. How he interpreted to stay in his backside as long as possible before it all snapped through was, I'm just going to think about taking my knee and think about absorbing force this way, and then boom, it snaps all through. And so, there's been guys that like we tell them that and it works, and there's gonna be some guys where they try and force it and it doesn't work. So now that, again, that's the subjectivity of one's expression of their motor output and how they move. So yeah.
The other thing that jumped out at me looking at video of him is his front leg. Almost the way he has a great use of his front leg and front hip. That you can see the rotation taking place. Like a lot of guys have a really hard time with that. If you look back, Justin Verlander's got an exaggerated lockout of his front leg. He does it with his front hip. You see the rotation into that hip, the leg lock up and provide force. Is that something that jumped out at you? Because it jumped out at me looking at it, the way, how well he stops his momentum with his front hip or uses rotational forces.
Yeah, well, it definitely cleaned up, right? And so, and again, like when you hit front foot strike, you're stabilizing that lead leg block isometrically first. So now that it's stable isometrically, right, now the pelvis has something against to snap down and rotate, which again, full internal rotation of the pelvis is what's going to naturally help clean up your lead leg block. And so that, like, again, the byproduct of getting stronger in the weight room, implementing unilateral lifts, implementing the isometrics, it naturally allowed that lead leg block to clean up while working on, rotational components.
Yeah, I will say that part jumped out at me as his rotational elements of his pelvis, especially around that front hip, is as good as I've seen anybody do. Like that part to me jumped out. I was like, oh, whoa, that was kind of the secret sauce to me. And like looking at it, not knowing everything else that went into his mechanics, that jumped out at me as a very high level move.
Yeah, I mean, think about like when you hit. So like a lot of athletes and pitchers out there could probably relate to this. Is that you'll notice like in the weight room, your lead leg block feels stronger or a tad bit is stronger than the back drive leg. Why? Because the back drive hip is always constantly going into flexion, rotation, extension. So you're deteriorating that hip capsule over time. Whereas when you're landing at front foot strike, you're constantly isometrically contracting that lead leg block. So now the pelvis has something against to rotate. And that's, yeah, like it plays such a huge role because when you hit front foot strike, now the energy is traveling back up the chain through the trunk to now, boom, meet that abrasive impact with the arm and the ball.
Yeah, that part really impressed me and almost and surprised me. Like I try to figure out what makes this dude unique that causes him to throw 103, where I've seen other similarly built guys or stronger, some guys that come in and you look at them like, oh, that guy's a horse, but they don't move like that. And that was the thing that opened my eyes to say, oh, that kind of that might be a big portion of why you can see the rotation. You can see the segments working, and that was the thing that really opened my eyes to watching him move.
And yeah, that, I mean, again, like that's again, like he has longer levers, the timing of it. So the perfection of that, right? There has been some genetic blueprint. Like that's why I say like that's the software, right? The software dictates the hardware, the bio to the mechanics, right? And so when you know that you got a kid like Bauer that has a high genetic skill set, it's like we got to take care of the kid's arm. We got to attack the low hanging fruit. We got to apply routines and structure and system. That's why we fall really heavily on, building routines for athletes, because these kids get pulled in many different directions at those youth ages and stuff. So it's like giving them structure, giving them routine, having something consistently to follow, off season and in season training is so huge. And obviously with the help of, Boris and their strength guys as well, and us being able to help data collect, it played a huge role in his career.
Do you think you can teach somebody that, or is that something that you have to have the genetic blueprint first and then you can maximize it? It's easier, obviously, if you have that. Is that something that not your average, but your advanced athlete, but somebody that doesn't quite have that blueprint, can you embed that in them?
I'll be honest, no. There are some kids based on their expression of motor output that won't be able to throw 95. That's a genetic fact. Like there are just some kids that can't. But when you identify a kid that has good skill, now it's looking at kind of like the culture thing. It's like, okay, what are you prioritizing? Like that's kind of like what my tangents about player development. It's like, okay, but if you're trying to gain the velocity and enhance the way your body moves, but yet you catch yourself thrown all year round, it's like realizing that you're undergoing stress all the time. And so that's just why I say like your mechanics is an expression based on how much stress you've adapted. So again, it starts with prioritizing that year, learning how to map it all out. And yeah, like if you identify a guy with a high skill set, you could definitely get them to 90, 95. But again, like there's tons of different methods and ways to do that. But we just got to make sure kids are prioritizing what they actually need and not have this fear of missing out if they didn't play a fall ball season or, whatever. It's just like, you got to prioritize. Like the landscape of college baseball is getting so much better now. And so how are you going to separate yourself, as an athlete? And that's why we built our own BSF app where athletes have access to that off season and in season training, but like even our in season, right? Like, kids would always ask me like, well, what do I need to do 2 or 3 days before I throw live and the days after? Well, that's why we built the plus and minus system. So on their app, they can actually shift those minus days, which are the days before, and then day 0 is your day of, and then the plus days are what they do the days after. And so it's all about priming and building that central nervous system up, being fully optimized and ready to go on that day of, and then having a restoration day and recovery and building back up with those minus days. It plays a huge role in how kids prioritize what they should be doing. And so just little things like that, like if you have that structure set, kids could see, significant results, because it's not always about gaining, it's about sustaining the velocity too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know how much harder you need to throw than 102, 103. Like it's from the left side, that's going to leave a mark. But he moves so much. So comparing mechanics. Like I'm looking at Aroldis Chapman, who I look at as the ultimate driving machine, the ultimate throwing machine. Like he does so many things so well and has for such a long time. But you compare that with how Jack moves. They don't move very similarly to me. They move a lot different.
Mhm.
They just solve the problem, different ways. They take advantage of their genetic blueprint or the things that they have advantages of and use it to the ultimate impact. What do you see when you've had a look at Aroldis's mechanics, and then thought about that as it applies to Jack's. What do you see the differences as?
The difference in their mechanics? I think I think uh, I think Aroldis definitely gets a little bit deeper into his back hip. He's able to hold and stabilize that a little bit longer down the slope, down the mound. Front glove side and leg gets a little bit further out and extended as to how they're kind of loading. He definitely has a lot more counter rotation and holding those positions. And again, I mean that guy's really really strong. Like let's just like and like that guy is built, and that's why I say like all physical potential is genetic, but not all genetic potential is physical. That guy got the best of two worlds. Like he just does. Like like that guy. How old is he right now? Like
37.
37. Come on. Like so.
Yeah, no one's ever done that before.
But there is definitely a significance difference, in the mechanics, and that's why I say that mechanics are just subjective based on an individual's expression of motor output and how they're built structurally and what their anatomy is like. There's so much multifactorial things about mechanics, but that's why like when you're for the viewers out there, it's like when you're only just looking at the hardware and you're living in a world of mechanicalism, right? Like you're going to find yourself chasing this hamster wheel. So it's also just understanding like that software integrity, isometrics and, understanding workload management. Like there's a lot that plays into it, right? Because, there'll be kids that are like kids will have they'll throw Friday. And then Thursday, I hear that they're throwing bullpens. It's like, guys, like you got to understand, like you got to do that a lot earlier and build back up to your baseline. It's called the general adaptation syndrome. So it's just like when you take care of those things, then, you could be fully optimized when you're ready to go. But like overall with Aroldis Chapman, that guy's a freak in nature. Does a great job at holding tension in that backside, the way he coils, the way he counter rotates, the way his front side holds. That's why I like to say like your front side guides, your backside drives, he does a great job at doing all that.
Yeah, the thing that impressed me about Chapman is that he was kind of built. I mean, even he was a very slim, very mobile guy when he was younger, and you can see him almost like a rubber band. Now he's like a very, very, very thick rubber band, and he's almost like a bodybuilder up there. He's adapted from being a mobile guy to keeping a lot of that mobility, but as you lose it as you get older, he's developed strength that now he uses a lot of to make up for the loss in a tiny bit of loss in mobility. He's made that transition better than anybody I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, again, it just goes to show that he's got both the best worlds with the physicality and the predisposed genetic, software blueprint that he's been gifted with. So to that point, with the software, the bio to the mechanics, like his body could have stayed lean and skinnier and more mobile and still thrown that, or he could have put down the muscle and continue to stay up to date with his mobility and stuff. I'd be actually curious to hear some of his pre-throw and what he does on his training regimen. I'd like to shout him out if he wants to reach out. But yeah,
I'm planning on catching up with him during the All-Star game. So we'll,
that's cool. But yeah, he's a genetic freak, man. And obviously not discrediting his work either. I know he's putting probably tons and tons of hours of work. I see the videos and stuff like that. Just seeing his structure from how, skinnier and all that stuff that he was and how he kind of just started to progress his body composition. And it's like the guy puts in work. Without a doubt.
So how hard do you think Jack could end up throwing? I know this is a guess. And I know that this is going to be asked by everybody because you're sitting there going, there's still room for growth. He's young. He's very young. And he can, I don't know how much strength is going to play into his eventual where he ends up being. What do you see? What is his ceiling as far as what you see? And I don't like putting ceilings on him, so we can say within 95%. Or what do you think he could end up being in your mind?
I would say like his top. I could see 104. Right, and Chase Burns hit 104. Right, just a day or two ago.
I don't think Chase hit. Mason Miller hit it last
Oh, I'm
night.
sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
cut that out.
Yeah.
Mason Miller. Yeah,
Yep.
didn't Mason Miller hit 104? Like
Yeah.
I could see Bauer getting up to 104 because I believe like the game that I was at, I was when he hit 103, I was standing with his agent Matt White, and he hit it twice. And I'm like, okay, like I can see 104. I think the sit range, right? Like, 97, 102, like that would be awesome. Seeing how well he can sustain that, deeper in game would be, the other thing that I would like to see that as well. So that's kind of what I say. It's all about also sustainability.
Yep. Let's talk about the injury component because number one, every time somebody sees somebody throwing that hard on social media, the 5 replies, 10 replies, Tommy John in one, 3, 2, 1. I hate those. But obviously there are in the back of your head, you're going, yeah, you know what? Pitchers do get hurt. But number one, don't put that on anybody. I feel like people are rooting almost for people to get injured because they're jealous. Instead of rooting for the athlete themselves and saying there are differences between how people use their body. Araldis has never, knock on wood, been seriously hurt or on the IL for anything. And you can see it the way he moves, but then it's some of it's genetics, some of it's movement patterns, some of it's taking care of yourself. What do you see as far as his future in that? Like, what do you do to minimize the chances of injury, and how well does he understand that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first I'll definitely say to those people out there that are commenting on that, I just think it's unethical and it's just not necessary. I mean, it's just like these kids are trying to pursue a dream and a passion that they have, just support it. But from that side of things, like, again, like it's going to come down to learning how to map out your year, learning how to have structure, learning to have consistency and routines. Professionals do the boring things most often and they do it the best. So yes, your routines might get redundant. Like, it's okay. Like, but that's the mental component side of things. Staying up to date on that is going to be obviously very crucial. Your sleep, your hydration, like the low hanging fruit. You do that the best out of anybody, you're going to have a long, sustainable career. And again, it's also understanding, like, on the, when you're looking at building back up, return to throw, understanding how to progress a guy's endurance, right? Like, for example, you're seeing a lot of high school injuries, but you're also seeing that at the youth, it's like the game of baseball is placing a bigger demand on the athlete now than ever before. Okay. You got, I mean, and so that's why I always say, like, you got over-prepared or under-prepared athletes. Like, over-prepared kids that want to specialize, which isn't bad, but they don't know how to map out their year. They catch themselves throwing all year round. They're not managing workload. They're not taking proper rest time in between. So that there's multifactorial issues with that. And then there's underprepared where they are playing multi-sports, which I'm all for too, right? You just got to learn how to balance and workload manage that as well. So if you're underprepared, then that means when you're in season with another sport like basketball, high endurance, high volume, well, you're not technically training the demands that the next sport like baseball is going to place on you. Because again, baseball's demand on the body with the stress is way different than like a basketball, right? It's passive. So the stress is going to our material continuum, passive connective tissue, our ligaments, our tendons, our bones. Like that's just a known fact. So if you're not training the body for that, then it's a ticking time bomb if you haven't built that up. So again, it's just very important to have that awareness in the industry and what our culture in America is like.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I think about, like, if you're trying to deadlift something, you don't automatically go in and try to hit your PR, or, I'm going in the gym trying to lift 500 pounds. I'm going to be on the floor with a broken back and my arms probably torn out of its socket. Like, you work your way up by conditioning the body to handle that, or else you're in for trouble. I think people don't think of that a lot. They think rest means rest, where there's more active rest, where you can build things up slowly so you're ready to take on a season, versus just rest meaning never do anything and then all of a sudden now you're ramping up because you're well rested. That's not a thing.
Well, what's the common denominator of all those multifactorial points? It's delaying gratification. And I just think our culture and our society nowadays, it's just a quick fix mentality. And, if you want to have a quick fix towards velocity and your structure and your body can't handle that jump. And, again, like sometimes the byproduct of being consistent for a few months is a velo jump, but now it's okay. When you notice that, now it's more about taking the more rest time in between pens and little things like that, having low, medium, high intent throwing days, like actually gauging in, velocity. Like everybody demonizes a velocity gun, but the most objective way to actually gauge your level of intensity of like, the effort that you're putting behind the throw is the velo. So it's just like, learn it how to use it as a proper tool. Don't demonize something. So now it's just about the maturity of the athlete to make sure that they're being smart, with the radar guns and understanding their low, medium, high intent days. But it just comes down to, delay and gratification. So you made a great point about that. That's just the culture that we have now in society. And, that's just kind of where we're at.
Well, that as a coach, how many times do people come to you and say, hey, what can I do to gain like 5 miles an hour? They just want it. Like there's one quick fix out there that you're going to change their mechanics in 30 minutes. And all of a sudden they're going to be throwing 5 miles an hour quicker. That could happen once out of every 100 times you see somebody.
And we've had that happen. We've foot mechanics plays a huge role with hip mechanics and vice versa. We had an athlete that was throwing a pen first 15, 20 pitches. He was like 81, 84. We fixed a little bit of his back foot positioning and he was like 85, 87. So it's like, okay, cool. Like that's awesome. But again, like that shouldn't be the goal for the athlete. And like for us, it's like during my first initial, metric evaluation assessments and going through that, talking with the athletes and even the parents on like injury history, like just getting the build report and knowing who they are, like also mentally, like their personality, like who they are as an athlete, their maturity level. It's like if I start to feel that you're just looking for a quick fix and you just want to come here for a month and just expect, all this, it's like, you may not be for us. It's like, we want to, this is a journey, right? The pitching is a journey, and like your whole year, like there's gonna be ups and downs, and, you're going to try and gain, you got to try and sustain that velocity in that sit range. And it's just like, if you're looking for a quick fix, I'm not going to put my name, BSF, or the Bo Jackson's Elite Sports brand on the line if you're just expecting a quick fix, you don't hit that goal, and then now you're just bad mouth, and just like, I'm not doing that. And so, it's like, I'm not afraid to tell you then you're not the right fit for us, because we want grinders in here. We want kids that are looking at this from a journey and make a story out of these kids and impact them. This is bigger than baseball. Like when you're working with high school, college, and we train professional athletes as well, but like we're helping them with stuff that's bigger than just baseball too. The way that we engage in the backspace and our culture, here in Lockport, it's incredible. I mean, I'm seeing kids that are now becoming best friends with each other, and everybody's a support system, and that builds character, and it just builds a culture in there that it's just like no other. It's awesome.
Well, one thing you mentioned back foot stuff. Scooble told me that he basically made the jump when he changed the position of his back foot because of the way his hips rotated. It was Robin Lund for the Tigers. He used to be at Iowa, told him to just change his position, and that made all the difference. It freed up his hips to rotate better. And he had always tried to use Aroldis Chapman as his blueprint. Like he actually mentioned he went through my Dropbox and pulled out when he was in college, pulled up Aroldis's mechanics every day and tried to copy it. They don't move at all the same. And he knew that, but at least it gave him a visualization of what he could be.
Yeah.
What jumped out at you? So Jack walks through the door, and you the first time you saw him, you mentioned that you were impressed by his genetic blueprint. What went through your mind when you saw that? Did you envision that he could be where he's at, or are you surprised where he's at? And like, when was the epiphany that you had that this guy is literally the hardest throwing high school lefty that has ever been gunned?
Yeah, no. So like when he first came in, I got to know him, build rapport with him and his dad. Like at that time, 2.5 years ago when he came in the summer, it's like, okay, I saw his structure, I saw his length, and we got to learn a little bit, like, what's going on, like, what's your velocity been up to? And when he said, 88, 92, like, that's where I've been. I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot to work with here. And so, when he was training with us and stuff, like, yeah, he put on a little bit of extra pounds and strength and just developing a better structure and routine with his day to day. And then, he went to that PBR All-American, hit 95. I'm like, all right, now we're seeing results. Like, okay, let's go. And then from there on out, like, yeah, then it started to get into like us collaborating, like I said, with Matt White and Boris, and like, grabbing, the force plate data and just helping him and having multiple people in his corner support him. I'll be honest, it did kind of surprise me a little bit of the jumps, but again, I would say like his process and his growth and his development in the off seasons was tremendous. The way he took care of his body, the way he was focused, like it it was day and night. Like it was awesome to see. And like, again, like the work allowed him to have a better expression of the genetic predisposed skill set that he was gifted and born to do.
Yeah, so he's got a very self-deprecating personality and is not the guy who sits there and acts like he walks on water. He's very good at, to me, my takeaway was he listens, he's not cocky. Aaron Watson, who's another high school pitcher going to be drafted, came in and just said, gave him a hug and goes, while I'm interviewing him, he goes, this guy throws the crap out of the ball. And just like the respect that they have for each other made me think that he was just a good kid in general, someone that everybody out there should be rooting for. And then him describing his mechanics was amazing to me, where he's like, goes through it all. And then he's like, I don't know why I'm even talking about this because I'm acting like I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. I'm like, dude, you're the hardest throwing lefty that's ever walked the earth in high school. So, I mean, you can be a little cocky if you wanted to, but none of that showed up. Is that him?
He's not cocky. He's a very humble kid. I mean, just our conversations in the backspace when he's in, he's a good kid. I mean, just well-rounded, comes from a great family. Like, he's a good kid. Like there's no other way to put it. Like he's very humble. Like he knows, like most probably kids in his shoes, when we talk about like the quick fix and all that stuff, like that mentality would probably be satisfied and content with that. But he knows there's more work to be done. He knows that, the next level is going to keep challenging him in all different ways. It's not just being on the mound. But that's a challenge. He embraces that. And that's also really special. Like he embraces the challenge, and that builds character. It just does, the adversity and all that. And so he embraced it. And that's why I'm really proud of the way he's been handling himself.
Last question. Is there anybody that you compare his mechanics to? Somebody that I'm having a hard time coming up with a comp. There are parts of, like I mentioned, Justin Verlander, especially a young Justin Verlander when he came up, but there's some things that he does differently too. And obviously they throw from a different side. Is there somebody that you look at as a blueprint for what he could be, or is he just charting his own course? You can say that too. Like he's just Jack Bauer.
I want to lean towards that. I was looking, like, I know like people always want to compare, and I've had a few people asking me to compare his mechanics to a guy that moves similar to him. I was trying to find guys. I was like, I'm having a hard time.
I had a hard time too. And I've seen everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to my point of how mechanics are very subjective.
Yeah. That's very interesting because I'm glad you said that, because I've been racking my head trying to figure out somebody, and I see different pieces of different guys, but there's nobody that has that same movement pattern. And it looks really easy to me, like it visually, because he sequences so well. And that's the thing. Explain to everybody out there what sequencing means, because I've said that before. And I promised somebody on YouTube, I said, I see it. I want to hear it directly from his coach, what he sees when he's seeing his sequencing. Just as simply as you can.
Yeah.
Explain his sequencing to us one more time.
It's the relationship between the pelvis and the torso and the timing of separation. It's not the distance. When people talk about hip to shoulder separation, it's the timing of that sequencing. And then it's the timing of how well these two guys, they're known as your proximal. So, lower half and trunk, how well they sequence, and then how well distally does the arm and the trunk time up with each other. Because again, your trunk direction is going to dictate your arm path. I could sit in front of a mirror all day I want and go like this, but the minute I'm getting pulled down by the forces of gravity and my trunk wants to fly out because I can't hold it, well, guess where my arm slot goes? So again, like that's when people talk about sequencing, that's the key. That's the key of that.
Perfect. Anything else you want to add?
No, I definitely appreciate your time, and it's awesome. You're a legend out there, Rob.
Well, for the record, your and your way of looking at the game is really interesting. And I see a lot of future in you in training pitchers at every level. So
Thanks, Rob.
I appreciate talking to somebody like that.